Silent Hill 2 is one of those games that I missed out on during the PS2 generation. Actually, I never had the opportunity to play any of the Silent Hill games, so I was definitely interested in what this remake could bring. However, when the trailer started dropping for this, I couldn't have been more disinterested. The gameplay and overall look of the game appeared to be a Walmart version of Resident Evil 4, so I quickly went from excited to skeptical. I don't know if it was the character models or just the fluidity of the gameplay, but this game wasn't looking good at all. However, one of the final trailers released and it looked vastly different, which was the push I needed to end up buying this. And for my first Silent Hill game, this exceeded all of my expectations.
What you got there?
None of your business. You didn't love Mary anyway.
What? Hey, wait! How do you know her name?
My biggest issue going into this game was definitely the gameplay. Like I mentioned, when watching the trailers, it all looked really slow and clunky, and when finally going through the game, it was. You fight all sorts of creatures in Silent Hill, and to do so, you have a couple of weapons at your disposal. This includes a pistol, shotgun, rifle, and a pipe. Shooting wasn't terrible, but using the pipe was where the clunkiness was the most apparent. You couldn't just spam the attack button and mash the pipe on all the enemies because there's a delay between each of James' swings, making you think about when you should hit the button. Even still, the movement itself takes some time to get used to. The swinging isn't fluid, and many times I found myself getting hit because I overestimated where the swing was going to land. Add on the fact that the enemies can perform these combo attacks, and you may find yourself taking on quite a bit of damage. But after going through some of these scenarios, it finally dawned on me. It makes complete sense as to why the combat is the way it is. This is supposed to be a horror game, not an action thriller game with some horror elements, so the combat is not going to be the main focus. Unlike Resident Evil 4, James is an untrained, normal guy, so it's realistic that he won't be able to perform any cool fighting moves or just be proficient at combat at all. Him just swinging a pipe around and struggling with these creatures is exactly how the gameplay should be. I don't know why it took me so long to realize this, but once you make this mental shift, the combat is a lot easier to digest. It never was going to be as fast paced and intense as RE4 or other games similar, and after understanding this, it made the game even more enjoyable. If you're like myself and was turned off by the gameplay in the trailers, don't let that stop you from playing this, because although it's clunky and slow, it's actually fun to play once you try it. When looking at the gameplay from a wider lens, I liked how you had to manage your ammunition at all times. If you're one of those players that likes to shoot everything, then you're going to have to switch things up a bit. Maybe it's different on the lowest difficulty, but even still, since the game's combat isn't designed to be run and gun, you can't afford to unload tons of ammo into every single enemy you run across. You'll end up running out quick. Because of this, I liked how you had to remember what the enemy types were and how you needed to approach fighting them. Like for most enemies, you can shoot once with your pistol and then follow up with multiple bashes from the pipe. Using this concept for the other enemies combined with your shotgun or rifle make the combat sections easy to get through. But I do have to stress, unless your timing is top tier, you're going to get hit frequently. No matter what the enemy is, thanks to the static movement, their attacks can be tough to dodge. In order to dodge, you press a single button, but getting the timing right is easier said than done. Many times I found myself getting hit because I got too aggressive and tried getting in too many hits when I should have pulled back. When this happens, you're punished for that aggression, and even the dodge won't save you most of the time. Add in the fact that the enemies are hiding behind small obstacles and walls, and you're going to have to pay attention. One thing that I was surprised to see were the boss fights. Now I did mention earlier that I'd never played the OG, so I wouldn't have known if there were boss fights or not, but when I got to them it was pretty cool to see. This is where the ammo conservation I mentioned comes into play. If you ran through all your ammo and didn't know when the boss section was coming, then you would have to fight the boss with virtually nothing at your disposal. Yes, the game does leave ammo lying around during the boss fight, but even still, it may not be enough. I liked how the boss fights, just like the rest of the game, took a bit of skill to understand, as you can't just bash your pipe until the enemy dies. The enemies do a lot of damage and you gotta watch their patterns to learn when to dodge, which creates a little bit of a challenge. The designs of the bosses are even creepier, which made me scared to getting close and do melee damage just because of how they looked. Of course, they're clunky like the rest of the combat encounters, but I applaud this game for having boss fights when it didn't even have to. I've played many games over my lifetime, but this is one where having the boss fights really added some variety to the gameplay that caught me off guard multiple times. On to the next area of the game that I both liked and didn't. The puzzles. Going into this, I had no idea that this game would have as nearly as many puzzles as it did. Right from the beginning, you're met with tons of them. These vary from finding combinations, symbols, and deciphering codes. What's even cooler is that you can choose the difficulty of those puzzles in the menu before starting a fresh playthrough. Regardless of what you choose, there's lots of puzzles. At first, I didn't mind figuring them out as I liked finding the clues and piecing everything together. But eventually, I got tired of having to complete puzzle after puzzle in order to get to the next place or unlock an area that would progress the story. This didn't ruin my gameplay experience at all, but I just thought there was too many of them. Especially once I got deep in the story, the last thing I was trying to do was a puzzle. It sort of ruined the moment. Regardless, these puzzles were fun, there were just a little too many for my taste. The first thing I noticed when playing this was how Blooper Team absolutely crushed the atmosphere. As soon as I entered Silent Hill, I was taken back by how creepy and eerie everything was. Of course, the fog is literally the first thing you see, but the music, creatures, and overall environment were incredible. Just walking from building to building has this small, unspoken layer of intensity to it. It's like you can't relax at all during your playthrough. The only time where you might think you're safe is when you're in a room with a save file. Other than that, every moment in Silent Hill is filled with suspense. What makes this even creepier are the moments when you first see objects from within the fog. So many times you're running or walking through the fog and see nothing in front of you, only to be met with an enemy, building, or person. For the rare times you do run into a person, it's such a shock to see another human that each encounter feels impactful. It doesn't matter if it's someone you met before or a new character, because this entire town is so creepy, I appreciated all the character moments. Now, you don't just stay in the town within Silent Hill, you do venture to other areas inside. Out of all the areas you go to, I would say the prison is the one I like the least, mainly because of how dark it was. The game is already dark the majority of the time, but now we enter a place that has its lights already cut off, along with enemies that are crawling up and down the walls. Yeah. This place was hell. Venturing all through the prison, fighting these creatures and solving the puzzles was enjoyable, but frustrating. Up until that point, we had a variety of enemies that we were encountering, but when these mannequins changed things up and started climbing and jumping from the walls, I started to rage, not even gonna lie. And you didn't want to waste shotgun or rifle ammo, so you probably used a pistol, which makes it harder to aim and harder to kill. But just like the rest of the game, I still enjoyed this section, but out of all the areas, this one was the one I liked the least. To sum it up, the gameplay in Silent Hill 2 isn't this game's focus, nor the game's strength, and the sooner you realize that, the better. But instead, this game adds in all the combat to make things more exciting. When you understand that, it's easier to adapt to the gameplay and get used to how it feels. But for a game that looked like its gameplay was PS3 tier, I was very happy to see that it turned out to be a lot better than I was expecting. The story for Silent Hill 2 has been around for years since this was a remake, but for a newbie like myself, I was surprised at how engaged I was into it. Right from the beginning, I found myself questioning everything and wondering why James was making the decisions that he was. If you're like me and just hearing about this game, then I'll tell you the premise real quick. You play as a guy named James who travels to Silent Hill in hopes of finding his wife, even though she has apparently already passed away. Just knowing this information made me confused. I'm like, why is this guy traveling to this scary ass town to find his dead wife? This guy is crazy as hell. But that was just in the beginning. As you meet other characters like Maria, Eddie, and Angela, I began to question their motives as well. But due to how Silent Hill is, you truly won't know exactly what's going on until the end of the game. As you get deeper in the plot, little by little things start to clear up. You start to understand what's going on and why it's happening. For my first time playing this, I thought this game did a great job at explaining the plot without completely hand-holding the player. If you've been playing games long enough, then you played a game that does a little too much when explaining the plot, almost treating you like you're stupid. Fortunately for Silent Hill 2, that's never the case. But it does get better. By the time you get to the end of the story, you're not guaranteed to get the same ending as everyone else who played because there's a plethora of endings. Some of them can be unlocked on a first playthrough, while the others can only be activated after a New Game Plus run. Either way, you have to satisfy certain requirements within both playthroughs to get a particular ending. I won't go into it, but for my playthrough, I got the leave ending, which I thought fit the game perfectly. All along James's journey through Silent Hill, I was constantly speculating and trying to piece things together because I thought I knew what was going on, or what was going to happen. But what I liked that the devs did was create more endings that allow you to sort of choose what ending you wanted the game to have. If you want a sort of happier ending, then you have the option to satisfy the requirements to get that. Same thing goes for the sad endings too. But what I liked more than anything else is that this game's story opens up discussion. Too many times in games, stories have finite endings that just leave things in a certain spot with nothing to talk about afterwards. However, in Silent Hill 2, that wasn't the case. No matter what ending you got, you're bound to ask your friends or other players online what endings they got and what they think is the best one. Since technically there is no canon ending, it's all opinion based, I think it's fantastic. Yes, all signs point to a certain ending being the canon one, but it's never 100% confirmed. I've always been a big fan of having dialogue after a story, and this game did a great job at slowly unraveling a plot, and then leaving it in a place where you may or may not be completely satisfied. In reality, it's not a huge deal, but I would love if more games did additional endings like this, as it creates good discussions and entices those players to replay the game to get those other endings. Overall, Silent Hill 2 was a solid horror game that the industry definitely needed. In an era of gaming where we don't get many good horror games, I'm glad that Blooper Team was able to remake this game and do it justice. If you prefer the original or the remake is completely up to you, but for someone playing this for the first time, I would definitely recommend this game if you're into survival horror. For those reasons, I'm going to give this game an 8.5. For a game that looked so bad in the trailers and then it turned out to be the complete opposite when playing it, it's literally a wolf in sheep's clothing. A very fun game that disguised itself as something worse simply due to some poor looking footage. If the combat was just a bit smoother and there were a little less puzzles, then I would have scored this even higher. Even still, those aspects of the game doesn't hinder my experience. Then you add on the fact that you can turn the difficulty of the puzzles and combat down, and none of this is really an issue. The combination of atmosphere and story makes Silent Hill 2 an intense and creepy experience that any fan of horror should give a chance, because you won't regret it. What did you think about the Silent Hill 2 remake? Did you like this more or the original? Let me know in the comment section below, and if you enjoyed this video, feel free to watch one of my other reviews right here.